नमस्कार, स्वागत छ इस्यु अफ द डे को यो श्रृङ्खलामा। आज हामी जलवायु परिवर्तनका सन्दर्भमा केन्द्रित छौं। विशेष गरी जलवायु परिवर्तनका कारण नेपालले हिमाली क्षेत्रमा रहेका हिमतालको जोखिमका विषयमा। जलवायु परिवर्तनको मुद्दा अहिले विश्वव्यापी चासो र बहसको विषय बनिरहेको छ। औद्योगिक मुलुकहरूले उत्पादन गरेको कार्बन र विकिरणका कारण वायुमण्डलको ओजन तहमा परेको प्वालको कारण यसको असरले विश्व नै अछुतो रहन सकेको छैन। जलवायु परिवर्तनका कारण विश्वव्यापी तापमानमा भएको वृद्धिले के धनी के गरिब सबै राष्ट्र यसको प्रभावमा लपेटिएका छन्। तर यहाँ गल्ती गर्ने बिरालो चोट पाउने मुसो भने झैं अवस्था देखिएको छ। धनी र विकासशील अझ भनौं औद्योगिक राष्ट्रहरूले गरेको जथाभावीको असर नेपाल जस्ता गरिब र अति कम विकसित राष्ट्रहरूमा परिरहेको छ। उत्तरतर्फ रहेका चाँदी झैं टल्कने हिमालहरू क्रमशः नाङ्गो पहाडमा परिणत हुँदैछन् भने कृषि प्रधान मुलुक नेपालको कृषि कर्ममा पनि अस्वाभाविक किसिमका परिवर्तनहरू देखा पर्न थालेका छन्। यस्तै उड्ने पंक्षीदेखि जमिनका जनावर मात्र नभई सरीसृपदेखि जलजन्तुहरू पनि उत्तिकै प्रभावमा छन् यो परिवर्तनको। नेपाल अहिले संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ अन्तर्गतको अति कम विकसित राष्ट्रहरूको समूह अर्थात् एलडीसी को अध्यक्ष पनि हो। विश्वका 45 भन्दा बढी राष्ट्रहरू एलडीसीमा गोलबद्ध छन्। यसको कारण पनि जलवायु परिवर्तनमा नेपालको दायित्व मुलुकभित्र नभएर अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय रूपमा पनि जोडिएको छ। हरेक वर्ष बस्ने एलडीसी को वार्षिक बैठकमा नेपालले जलवायु परिवर्तनको क्षेत्रमा भएको प्रगति र गतिविधि प्रकाश पार्नुपर्ने हुन्छ। नेपाल जलवायु परिवर्तनको सबैभन्दा बढी प्रभाव परेको विश्वको चौथो मुलुक पनि हो। यसको कारणले पनि नेपालले यसमा झन बढी संवेदन भएर काम गर्न आवश्यक छ नै। हाल जलवायु परिवर्तनको क्षेत्रमा नेपालका विभिन्न 5 मन्त्रालयहरूले काम गरिरहेका छन्। फोकल मिनिस्ट्रीको रूपमा वातावरण मन्त्रालयले काम गरिरहँदा वन मन्त्रालयले रेड प्लस अन्तर्गत काम गर्दै वन क्षेत्रमा परेको असरलाई नियालिरहेको छ। त्यस्तै कृषि मन्त्रालयले कृषिमा परेको प्रभावको असर हेरिरहेको छ। यता प्रधानमन्त्रीको नेतृत्वमा जलवायु परिवर्तनका मुद्दालाई सम्बोधन गर्न काउन्सिलिङ नै गठन गरिएको छ। नेपालले असरको सम्बोधन गर्न क्लाइमेट चेन्ज पोलिसी पनि बनाएको छ र प्रभावित मुलुकहरूमा पोलिसी तयार पार्ने मुलुकमा नेपाललाई भने अन्तिम मानिन्छ। तर पनि जलवायु परिवर्तनका मुद्दाहरूका विषयमा हुने ठूला अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय मेला तथा सेमिनारहरूमा घुम्न र सहभागी हुन नै ठूलो उपलब्धि ठान्ने नेपालका सरोकारवाला निकायका कर्मचारी र पदाधिकारीहरूले मुलुकभित्र परेको असरको बारेमा भने त्यति गहन संवेदना राख्न नसकेको प्रष्ट हुन्छ। अति प्रभावित मुलुक नेपालमा परेको असरबारे अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय समुदायहरूले देखाएको चिन्तालाई समेत मुलुकको हितका लागि प्रयोगमा ल्याउन नसकेको गुनासोका औंलाहरू सिंहदरबारतर्फ निरन्तर ठडिरहेका छन्। नेपालले विगत केही वर्षदेखि निरन्तर रूपमा खाद्यान्न आयातमा करोडौं खर्च गर्नु परिरहेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनको असर द्रुत गतिमा कृषिमा प्रत्यक्ष र परोक्ष रूपमा पर्दै जाँदा परम्परागत ज्ञानको आधारमा खेतीपाती गरिरहेका कृषकहरूले जलवायु परिवर्तनले पारेको असरबारे अनभिज्ञ नै छन्। उनीहरूलाई यस बारेमा सही जानकारीको अझै अभाव छ, जसले गर्दा कृषि उत्पादनमा प्रतिकूल असर परिरहेको छ। मन्त्रालय र विभागका कोठामा सीमित जलवायु परिवर्तनको असर र बच्ने उपायका सूत्रहरूलाई किसानहरूको खेतबारीमा पुर्याउन ढिलाइ भइसकेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनका कारण देखिन थालेको टु मच वाटर टु लेस वाटर अर्थात् अतिवृष्टि र अनावृष्टिबारे पनि कृषकहरू अनभिज्ञ नै छन्। दुवै अवस्थामा कसरी अनुकूलित हुने अर्थात् एडाप्टेसनका उपायहरू नेपाली सरकारी विज्ञहरूले अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय मञ्चबाट बुझेर सिकेर आए पनि त्यो उपाय कृषकहरूसम्म पुर्याउने काम हुन सकेको छैन। दात्री मुलुकहरूले जलवायु परिवर्तनको असरबाट बच्न र विभिन्न उपायको अवलम्बन गर्न नेपाललाई वर्षेनी करोडौं रुपैयाँ उपलब्ध गराउँदै आएका छन्। दाताहरूको शर्त सहयोगको 80% रकम प्रभावित क्षेत्रमा अर्थात् स्थानीय स्तरमा खर्च गर्नुपर्ने राखिए पनि व्यवहारमा त्यो पनि लागू हुन नसक्दा नेपालले ठूलै विपत्तिको सामना गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था नाउला भन्न सकिन्न। अर्को मूल असर परेको नेपालको हिमाल र ग्लेसियर अर्थात् हिमतालहरू हुन्। नेपालको हिमाल र हिमतालहरूबाट हिम नदी मार्फत दैनिक 29,000 करोड लिटर पिउन योग्य पानी बग्ने गर्दछन् र यसमा 3 अर्ब भन्दा बढी मानिस आश्रित रहेको बताइन्छ। तर हिमाली क्षेत्रमा परेको प्रभाव र हिमतालहरूमा देखिएको जोखिमले चाँडै नै भारतीय उपमहाद्वीपमा नै पानीको हाहाकार मच्चिन सक्ने भयावह अघि आएको छ। यसका साथै नेपालको चुरे क्षेत्रको तीव्र रूपमा भइरहेको विनाशले पनि 10 वर्षभित्रै नेपालका तराईका जिल्लाहरू सुक्खाको मारमा पर्ने कहाली लाग्दो तथ्य सार्वजनिक भइ नै सकेको छ। यस्तै जलवायु परिवर्तनको असरले मानिसमा नयाँ नयाँ खालको बिरामीहरू देखा पर्न थालेको छ। त्यसैले पनि स्वास्थ्य अनुसन्धानमा पनि तत्काल काम गर्न आवश्यक भइसकेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनको असरले देखिएको यो भयावह चित्र एकातिर भए पनि नेपालले यसबाट फाइदा लिन सक्ने सुखद पक्ष पनि अर्कोतर्फ छ। अहिले चलेको कार्बन ट्रेड व्यापार अन्तर्गत नेपालले असरलाई लाभमा परिणत गर्ने अवसर भएको पनि विज्ञहरू बताउँछन्, जस अन्तर्गत बायोग्यास, हाइड्रो पावर र धुवाँरहित चुल्होको क्षेत्रमा नेपालले अपार सहयोग पाउने सम्भावना चुलिएको छ, जसका लागि सरकारले गम्भीर कदमहरू चाल्न आवश्यक छ। यसका साथै वनलाई कार्बन चुस्ने शक्तिको रूपमा प्रयोग गर्न थालिएको छ, जसका कारण रबर प्लान्ट लगायतका क्षेत्रमा नेपालले यथाशक्य सहयोग पाउने सम्भावना बढेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनले नेपालको जल, जमिन, जंगल, जडीबुटी र जैविक विविधता नराम्ररी जरो गाडेकाले सचेतता अपनाउन आवश्यक भइसकेको छ। प्रकृतिमाथि मानव सभ्यताबाट भएको दोहनको उपज हो जलवायु परिवर्तन, जसका कारण प्रकृतिले आफ्नो नियमित प्रक्रियाको बाटो परिवर्तन गर्न बाध्य भएको छ। हल्लै हल्लाले एक समयमा जोखिममा रहेको ठानिएका नेपालका विभिन्न तालहरू अब भने वास्तविक जोखिमको किनारामा उभिएका छन्। जलवायु परिवर्तनको तीव्र असर भोगिरहेका नेपालका हिमतालहरूले कुन समयमा कहिले आफ्नो रौद्र रूप देखाउने हुन् भन्ने आशंका दिनानुदिन बढ्दो छ। नेपालको हिमाली क्षेत्रमा कथम कदाचित गडबडी भयो भने नेपाललाई मात्र नभएर भारतीय उपमहाद्वीपमा नै यसले नराम्रो भौगोलिक वितण्डता मचाउने निश्चित छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनको मूल र तीव्र असर अहिले नेपालको हिमाल र हिमतालहरूमा देखिएका छन्। अहिले नेपालका 6वटा हिमतालहरू अत्यन्तै जोखिमपूर्ण अवस्थामा रहेको हिमाल सम्बन्धी अध्ययन गरिरहेको संस्था इसिमोडको तथ्याङ्कमा उल्लेख गरिएको छ। हिमालय क्षेत्रको तापक्रम विश्वको सरदर वृद्धि भन्दा धेरै उच्च दरमा बढिरहेको छ, जसको प्रत्यक्ष प्रभाव नेपालका हिम श्रृङ्खलामा परिरहेको छ। हिमालमा रहेका हिउँ छिटो पग्लिनाले हिमतालमा धेरै पानी जम्मा भइरहेको छ र ताल फुट्ने खतरा बढ्दै गएको छ, जसलाई अंग्रेजीमा ग्लेसियल लेक आउटब्रस्ट फ्लड भनिन्छ। नेपालमा अहिले 1400 भन्दा बढीको संख्यामा हिमतालहरू छन्, जसमध्ये 20वटा ताल खतराको सूचीमा छन् भने 6वटा उच्च जोखिममा छन्। नेपालमा अझै हिमतालहरूको संख्या बढ्दैछ, जसको कारण हिमाल पग्लिनु नै हो। यी हिमतालहरू कुनै पनि बेला विस्फोट हुन सक्ने खतरा औल्याउन थालिएको छ। यसो भयो भने नेपालका तराई भूभागहरू डुब्ने छन् भने हिमालको हिउँ रित्तिने अवस्था सृजना हुनेछ। यसको रोकथामका उपायहरू बेलैमै नअपनाउने हो भने नेपालको तराई डुब्ने र हिमालहरू नाङ्गा पहाडमा परिणत हुनेछन्। हिमाल र सागरको अन्योन्याश्रित सम्बन्धका कारण सन्तुलित रहेको जलवायुमा यसले निकै ठूलो प्रभाव पर्नेछ। हिमालहरू पग्लदै गएपछि समुद्रको सतह पनि बढ्ने र एसियाकै केही टापु मुलुकहरूको अस्तित्व नै विलीन हुन सक्ने खतरा पनि बढ्दै गएको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तन प्राकृतिक हो, तर औसतमा भन्दा द्रुत गतिमा भइरहेको अप्राकृतिक परिवर्तनका कारण मालदिभ्स अत्यन्तै जोखिमपूर्ण अवस्थामा रहेको इसिमोडका डाइरेक्टर जेनरल डाक्टर डेभिड जेम्स मोल्डन बताउँछन्। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय समुदायले यति धेरै चासो नदेखाएको पनि उनको दाबी छ। उत्तरको चाँदी झैं टल्कने हिमालहरू अटल छन्, तर सम्भावित प्राकृतिक विनाशका कारण यो अटलतामा प्रहार भए त्यसको असरले दक्षिण एसियाको भूगोलमा उतार चढाव ल्याउने दिन टाढा छैन। नेपालका हिमालहरूको स्रोतको आधार भएर बग्ने नदीहरूमा भारतीय उपमहाद्वीपकै अर्बौं प्राणीको दिन दैनिकी गुज्रिरहेको छ। त्यसैले पनि नेपालको हिमाल र हिमतालहरू जोखिममा पर्नु भनेको नेपालको मात्र नभएर यो साझा समस्या नै बनिसकेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनको असर वायुमण्डल, प्राकृतिक वातावरण, मानिसको दैनिकी, पशुपक्षी र यसै गरी बोट बिरुवामा प्रत्यक्ष अप्रत्यक्ष रूपमा परिरहेको छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनको असर विशेष गरी हिमालय क्षेत्रमा र नेपालका हिमतालहरूमा कस्तो छ? यही विषयमा हिमाल सम्बन्धी अध्ययन गरिरहेको संस्था आइसिमोडका डाइरेक्टर जेनरल डाक्टर डेभिड जेम्स मोल्डनसँगको कुराकानी प्रस्तुत गर्छौं। Nepal is fighting against the deadly threat of Himalayan meltdown. The evidence has been conclusive enough to make glaciers melt down as an important indicator of the climate change. Thus, it will have an ultimate effect on the people of mountain and Himalayan region, as well as on their livelihoods and the whole ecosystem. We will have a talk on this topic. We have Dr. David James Molden, the Director General of International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Molden, we have been talking about the effects of climate change since a decade, and what are the impacts since then and now?
If we look over the last decade or even 20 years, we've seen several different kinds of impacts that we're feeling now. So, for example, a big one is about glaciers and glacier lakes. That seems to get more attention. But also there's rising temperature, and we tend to think that temperatures rise faster in mountain areas. There are possibly changes in monsoon patterns and changes in river flows. And in fact, we are seeing now perhaps more intense rainfall events due to climate change that's related to flooding as well. So there are certainly a lot of changes. I think the agriculturalists are sensing changes, the way they grow crops. Maybe they can grow things higher on the mountain slopes, or changes in when they can typically plant or harvest, or when crops flowers. So those are a lot of the different signs that we see from climate change.
We have been discussing about this matter since a very long time. What are the effects that is growing more fast?
The number one is with the glaciers. That's the one. Glaciers, in a way, are a very direct signal of climate change, right? They get basically more heat going into the glaciers. They melt and thin. So we see and have taken measurements of a lot of the different glaciers and see that many of them are indeed retreating and thinning. But that's in a sense just the tip of the story, the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because we have also, if we consider the rainfall patterns, right, we can see more intense rainfall patterns, but also longer drought periods. That's been a trend in recent years.
While talking about the glacial lakes in Nepal, what are the impacts or how can we see the glacial lakes stage in Nepal in this context?
So what's happened as the glaciers melt and retreat, they leave behind these glacial lakes that are impounded by a glacial moraine, like a dam. So we see these both growing in volume, right? The glacier lakes expanding, as well as in number across the Himalayas. And of course the danger is if one of those glacier lakes burst open.
What are the numbers of glacial lakes in Nepal today?
We have a recent study of ICIMOD, and that was using high-resolution satellites as well as field visits. We calculated that there were 1,466 glacier lakes. About 14 of those are dangerous, and 6 require the highest priority as being very dangerous.
6 are in a critical stage.
6 are in a critical stage, yeah.
What leads a glacier lake to outburst?
Well, what happens? The glacier lakes grow in volume, right? And you can imagine the at the end there's like a dam made of debris and rocks. So eventually that dam, as the glacier lake grows, might break, right? And what might trigger that is, of course, more water coming in, or it could be triggered by an avalanche coming down and knocking a wave, or it could be triggered by an earthquake. A small earthquake may trigger those. So it's hard to predict when that will happen. But then when that, if it does happen, and it has happened in the past in Nepal, you get a huge surge of water barreling down typically a very steep channel, so the water levels in the river rise quite high, and the danger to life and property, especially up near the mountains, is quite high.
Dr. Molden, will you please name those glacial lakes which are in the stage of critical stage?
We've named off 6 of those lakes. There's Solropa, there's Imja, there's Tulagi, there's Tampokari, there's Lamding, as well as the lower Barun lake are the ones that do require some attention.
What is ICIMOD doing right now in those areas to protect the area?
Yeah.
The steps that is being carried out on those potentially critical areas.
Yeah.
Glacial lakes.
What ICIMOD's role has been to figure out how many are there, which ones are dangerous, and then what we could do about it, right? So that's kind of our role. Now I know that, say, UNDP now is taking actions on the Imja Glacier starting to take action to lower the water level to reduce the pressure on that Imja lake. So it's, in a sense, providing information, but we need some more action on those critically dangerous glaciers as well.
What methodology is carried out for this study about those lakes?
Well, there's one that the study of the lake, we use, say, remote sensing and field visits to get the volume and how the volume changes. But what we need now is to figure out what to do about it, right? They're there. That's, I think, the critical question at the moment. And one action to take is to actually lower the level of the lake behind the dam wall, to lower it a little bit to relieve some pressure. So that's one engineering activity that can be done, needs to be done. Very difficult because of the high elevation to do that. The other that we need to work carefully with government and local communities, or government and local communities need to do, is to set up some kind of early warning system or warning systems and be prepared in case that day, and hopefully it does not happen, but in case that day happens, to be prepared in case it does break out.
While we talk about the melting of Himalayas, the formation and the retreat of the glacial lakes, the issue of rising of sea level is also one of the major topics to be discussed today. It is said that Maldives, Sri Lanka, as well as other towns and valleys that are around the sea level, around sea and ocean, are in the danger of disappearance. Is this true?
A country like Maldives is quite worried. You have to picture Maldives as an island that has kind of roti-shaped islands, very flat, not very high in elevation, 1 or 2 meters. So they are very concerned about sea level rise, and rightly so. I remember the ministers going underwater to make a statement and having their government meeting underwater. So that's of concern. Sri Lanka, of course, is a little bit higher elevation, although coastal areas, Bangladesh, for example, I mean, that's an issue if sea level comes up and at the coastal level as well. Luckily, Nepal escapes worrying about that particular issue, although all these things are very much global issues that the global community should be concerned about.
It means that Maldives is in high risk.
Maldives is at high risk, yeah. So a lot of times, by the way, when we bring this issue to the international forum, a good strategy is that mountain areas that are of high risk due to glacial melt should get together with small island states who are at risk to bring the issue to the to the global community.
How sensitive is the mountain ecosystem?
The mountain ecosystems are extremely sensitive, right? So you have at elevation many different changes in ecosystem. You have a very fragile environment. We can see that around by the landslides that we see how fragile it is. I think it is susceptible to very intense rainfall events. We experience that from day to day. So any of these changes does tend to impact mountain regions, mountain people disproportionately than other places, say in the plains.
We talked about some of the impacts, some of the effects of climate change. What are the projected effects in the days to come if we are not sincere in this day about the climate change effects?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down, the impacts will be on very much people, right? I mean, that's
Directly
the number one thing to be concerned about. Of course, through nature and ecosystems, through people. But what is at stake is issues of food security, right? And because of the warming, and you have to plant crops at different places, and can they take the warming? There'll be probably another set of insects that farmers have to worry about, for example. And with the more intense rainfall patterns, there's more risk of flood that we have to be prepared for. I think with warming in general, people have to be prepared for that as well.
Glacial lakes are the potential natural resource of the drinking water too. If the lakes are itself in the stage of risk and danger, what will be the effect on drinking water as well as the electric supply?
Well, the lakes, probably the volume the lakes hold compared to all the water in Nepal is actually quite small. So I wouldn't worry so much about the drinking water from the glacial lakes, but I do worry very much about the new hydropower plants being built, right, that need to be designed taking into consideration the risks of a glacial lake outburst flood. So when we're building those new hydropower stations, we need to factor in the risk that something upstream might break and cause a flood. So the last thing we want is that to damage or be exacerbated by that hydropower plant downstream. So we need new planning, even when we're thinking of hydropower as well.
How serious and concerned do you find the international giant nations about this thing?
I think everybody needs to get more serious about the problem. I think it's something that Nepal itself is not a major emitter of greenhouse gases and not the driver of climate change. It's big industrial countries of the world. So I believe it's worthwhile getting their attention on these issues of glaciers or of mountain people to help really to do something about it in Nepal.
International conferences, international seminars are held, but so far, any long-term solutions are sought or not so far?
Yeah, we do have solutions. We're seeking actively solutions. There's a lot of interest internationally on how people adapt to climate change, how to mitigate. So at ICIMOD, for example, we're working with communities, mountain communities, on how they could adapt agriculture systems or set up early warning systems. We're trying to get more effort. More effort is needed, but we're trying to get more attention to glacier lakes and the issues of glaciers as well. So something is we're learning how to do these. These are all new issues and to deal with. But there is some attention. I think there should be more as well.
The state of too much water, too less water. The farmers in Nepal are still not aware about this fact, and it is a time to teach them, to aware them, to adapt the situation. How can we do that, or how can ICIMOD play a role in that?
Yeah, one of the big dilemmas of Nepal, in a sense, is there's a lot of water in the country of Nepal, but if you go to the hills, right, and a lot of people face the issue of water scarcity. I don't have enough water. It's a real issue in Nepal, and perhaps this too much water flooding followed by too little drought is really felt strongly by people. So I think, again, it is finding solutions. I think a lot of the solutions you can find them within the mountain communities who are incredibly resourceful when dealing with these problems. It's just sometimes the problems get so big it's hard even for the most resourceful person to do. So I think there's a few things to do. One is to figure out what kind of approaches could you use. For example, how can communities use water more sparingly or more effectively. The other is actually how to get more water to farming communities, and an example of that is rainwater harvesting. So when it rains, now as monsoon, we have too much water now. Can't we store some of that water for use in the dry period? And there are ways to do that. Traditionally, Nepal has used a lot of small reservoirs or ponds to store water, and some of those we can bring back. Some we can get the water to flow in the groundwater and to recharge our springs like that. So I think these are issues that need urgent attention. I think ICIMOD's role is a few different things. One is to understand the situation, draw attention to it, but help work with communities to figure out solutions to their problems, work with NGOs and governments to try to get those out. So we do have a big role to play in that regard.
What are the recommended policies of glacier lake outburst risk reduction? Because the resulting of a glacier lake outburst flood can result to the serious damage of life, of people, environment, as well as flora and fauna.
Yeah. I think there are two big approaches. One is a more engineering approach where you go in and fix the lake by trying to drop the level. The other is to work with the communities downstream on a few different things. One is the early warning system, right, and what they need to do if it happens. So for example, you could put a device that measures the water level, and if that device sees the water level goes up, it could give a horn or actually put SMS signals on cell phones and tell people to move, right? That can be set up. But the other issue is where people build houses, right, and build their schools. A lot of times is right where that flood might come. So if no flood happens in many years, people get comfortable and relaxed and then start building closer and closer to the riverbanks, when indeed they should be keeping their houses up high because they're very much in danger of the glacial lake. So some kind of zoning and attention to where people build houses and businesses, and actually bridges too, is quite important.
How are the studies being made about the glacial lakes that are facing a potential threat, basically by the Nepal government, by ICIMOD, as well as the international organizations which are working for the climate change effects as well as the environment?
I think what we see are several people involved in glaciers and glacier lakes, taking measurements, a lot of scientific measurements. I would say that as well in interacting with governments very much involved when, for example, we do our studies. Would say what's needed is a lot of coordination amongst those researchers, and actually more focus on action to be taken is needed now on these glaciers and glacial lakes.
If glacial lakes outburst, can you figure out how harm or how serious damage
Yeah.
it might put on to the lives of the mountain people, as well as the downstream level and the global effect too?
Yeah, it is possible to do what, and that's a type of study. So what you can do with computer models is you can simulate a glacier lake outburst and actually see where it might affect lives and livelihoods, and actually how fast that water would be moving downstream. That's possible through studies. But so we have done a few of those and can actually map out where the danger area would be through these studies.
People are not wondering about the melting down of snow from Himalayas, but they are worried that their life and their livestock will be seriously damaged if the lake outbursts. Their concern is on the outburst of the glacial lakes. What did you find?
I relate, and I'm talking more about our staff at ICIMOD, right, who have in the past done quite a bit of work, but they do, it's essential to communicate with the local community, right? And so our staff are very much attuned to doing that, especially with these flood early warning systems. So they do go out and meet with the communities and discuss the issues and findings very much.
How cooperative does ICIMOD find the local people?
Well, I think the local people, they're the ones who are most worried, right? So I think I rather feel a sense of the local people asking ICIMOD, asking the government to do more, right? So that's what I feel in that sense. That's a big issue for us.
They can't directly work out for the issue, but as you mentioned, that they are the one who are really worried about this matter. So to preserve the lakes and to preserve them from outburst floods, as the six glacial lakes that you mentioned, what attempts are made by international force?
Right. Well,
rather than if there's government and the ICIMOD working here.
Well, I think the first thing is when we're working in Nepal, then ICIMOD is working with the government, right? So that, and we try to make sure the government is on board and knows what we're doing. We rarely would do something quite independent of the government. So our activities, ICIMOD, by the way, is the vice chair of the National Planning Commission, sits on our board, and we're intergovernmental. So just to make that clear. So we're very conscious of working together with the government. Now, recently, UNDP has starting up an effort, and we helped to design that effort together with the Nepal government to reduce the risk of glacier lake outburst from the Imja lake. So that's happening. Some effort is happening. I think that we need to step up our efforts in this regards, but there is something going on, as well as working downstream with communities on that early warning system.
I'm concerned to this subject because it said that the gas, the pollution that are emitting from the international giant nations, and it said that Nepal is being punished.
One could consider that that way. I mean, again,
so
Nepal.
I'm concerned to know. So this is the reason why I'm concerned to know the international interest here.
Yeah, I think for example, ICIMOD gets funding a lot. We get funding from Nepal, but we get funding from international sources. A lot of that funding is to understand issues of climate change, right? So as an example, that's something. I think the international community does need to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in countries like Nepal. I think there's a responsibility from the international community to do that. Just for the reason you said, is Nepal is not the cause of the problem, and yet Nepal is with these
Nepal is suffering from this problem.
is suffering from that problem. So I think there is a responsibility, and to do it in a way that is very mindful of the local people here. So,
Dr. Molden, what's the ICIMOD's future planning or the planning in the further year to protect glacier lakes?
well, what we do and have been very good at is figuring out ways to measure and monitor them, to get that information out. And I appreciate you coming and asking me these questions as one way to do that, to get the information out to Nepal, but also the global community. We have a responsibility to take that message to the global community. And then we have a role to play in figuring out how to reduce the risks from glacial lakes. What are the best ways to work with communities to set up those early warning systems, to get regulations in place? So our role is on the knowledge side, right, and really to get action to happen. A lot of times other organizations who are more have to, as well as the government, has to take the role of implementing these solutions.
As you mentioned earlier, that the study of the glacial lakes are done by engineering methods as well as computing model. What are the methods used for the study while ICIMOD itself is on the field?
So we have, when ICIMOD monitors a few different glaciers, right? We monitor the Longtang Glacier and then Rikasamba up near Dhaulagiri. So actually, we work together with Kathmandu University, and Kathmandu University trains students. So we go together with students from Nepal and from the region up to the glaciers, take several days to walk up there. Then we have ground studies where we take measurements to get we put a stake in and get a mass balance measurements to try and tell the difference or how fast the glacier is shrinking or growing over time. So it's in a way that field study can be slow and tedious in getting this kind of information. We also put measuring instruments to get the climate, what's happening up at those glaciers. But the important part is to also get more people trained, because we have so many glaciers in the Himalayas, and we don't have enough information about them. So we need to get more people trained, more acting as a knowledge hub to get scientists together to get a good picture of the glaciers as well. The other part we're trying to do is to get more measurements through remote sensing, through satellites, where we get more and more higher resolution images available to get more information about glaciers. We need both approaches as we go forward.
If we are not aware and if we do not step out any policies for stopping the threat, what can be the result in future?
If we take no action, then we're in trouble. I mean, the signs are pretty clear. So I mean, you don't know what's going to happen when, and it could be one of those six. It could be another one that maybe we didn't get quite right. So I think it's imperative to take as much action as possible.
What is the impact on climate change of air pollution and black carbon?
Okay, we have climate change as caused by greenhouse gases, more carbon in the atmosphere, driving a global climate change. But what we've also seen is increased pollution, and you've seen it, right? You know that in Kathmandu. You know that across Nepal, that layer of haze that comes up. It's actually the atmospheric brown cloud that's starts in many different countries, but it builds up. What that does is it causes increased warming, and actually could contribute more to the glacier melt as well. So what we have is, on top of our normal climate change, we have these other additional impacts from pollution. And the interesting part of that is it's something we can address and actually save some of the problems as we're looking forward.
What are the steps that we have to follow now to reduce the effects of climate change? Because it's said that these days the climate change is unnatural.
Natural or
Unnatural.
unnatural?
Climate change is a natural process, but
Yeah.
the rate that the change of climate
Yeah.
is being these days, it's unnatural.
Yes, I mean if we
Climate change is natural.
right. So if we look at the IPCC reports and other report and science is telling us that yes, climate has changed over time, over many thousands of years. But what we see, for example, with more and more carbon spiking in the atmosphere, and it looks like the kind of temperature rise that is going faster than those natural patterns of climate change. So we do have to make adjustments and figure out how to adapt to the future. I think some people look at that as, don't worry, that's 50 years. Why, I've got bigger problems. But what I sense in mountain area like Nepal, that we're feeling the pinch more than other people now, right? So it is something to worry about actually now. The response in Nepal is more, I think there are several things, but how to adapt to these changes. Some of those changes may not necessarily be bad, right? It may not all be bad. If you could grow different crops at a higher elevation, that may be beneficial to people. So it is figuring out how to respond. I think a response is, we talk here sometimes about green economy and green technologies, and perhaps there's a better way for in the future, right, that is more environmentally sensitive, that Nepal in many ways is pioneering and trying out different methods moving forward. So I think it can be a model for other countries. I see more, for example, solar power coming up here in this country quite strong.
Isn't there a need of research and study on the Himalayan precipitation process?
There is a big need to look at precipitation patterns. Now, what tends to get the headlines, right, is the glaciers and the glacier lakes, and in a way that's quite visible and striking already. What I'm concerned about more, in a sense, is the rainfall patterns, right? So if we have a shifting of monsoon patterns or more floods and more droughts, that potentially is more damaging than glaciers or shifting glaciers and glacier lakes. So a lot of the big rivers, going the Koshi, Bagmati, going down to the Ganga, they're mostly rain-fed rivers. So a lot of our water supply is coming from that rainfall. Some of the big floods we've seen are really driven by these intense rainfall events as well.
In the study of precipitation process, the Himalayan regions are excluded in some of the study. It is said that it's true.
I think what you're referring to is that the Himalayan region is called a white spot in these studies. That was coming out after the last IPCC assessment report. Just not enough data in the region, right? Now what has happened, and I can say ICIMOD is playing a role as much as we can, is that we are trying to get more data and information about the Himalayas and get them to these international processes. So starting to fill in that data white spot. Now added to that is that we're talking in the mountain areas, very high elevation areas where it's very difficult to measure rainfall, for example. So it makes the studies even more challenging.
What are the development policies that we have to follow now to reduce the effects of climate change? What can we do? What can Nepal do?
Yeah, on the mitigation side, I mean, on the less greenhouse gas emissions, but pay attention to the pollution, right? That's number one, because if we can immediately reduce pollution, we can lower the stress on temperature rise and actually help agriculture production. It's likely that that impacts yield. That's number one. Number two is focus a lot on adaptation. Help communities in the countryside, for example, to figure out what to do with agriculture. Help to figure out what to do to get ready with floods. Help with the water systems that might be changing. So I think it's getting prepared, developing adaptation strategies. The good thing about it is the payoff is immediate on a lot of those agriculture. They're good for us now.
Is there a need to develop the appropriate technology?
Absolutely. I think what we need are technologies that are suitable for mountain areas, for mountain people a lot of times at different income levels, so not everybody can afford the most expensive technologies. So there's a big need of looking at different technologies, environmentally friendly, socially conscious, women friendly technologies, and that needs attention.
There is a need of revisit, there is a need of redesign, as well as research agendas, development policies, management, conservation practices, development of technologies in this subject matter.
Yeah. Oh yes. I think what we have to look at as far as education, I think really should revisit, right, education, given in light of these environmental and climate change issues we're facing. And like you say, are there different technologies or approaches, or do we just copy a cookbook like what everybody else has done and what we've all gone wrong with in the past? So I think there's a role for really looking at this. I think even universities, we find they're lacking in curricula related to mountain and hill issues, and that's not Nepal, that's in the whole region. So we're trying to get universities together to develop mountain-specific curricula. A great example is this course where we're training glaciologists. Kathmandu University is training Nepalese glaciologists, but also training people from this region as well. So
ICIMOD is playing a role as a mediator to convey the message, to convey the information in the international platform about how the Nepalese people are worried about the problem of climate change, basically in the Himalayan region. Is it that the international people are concerned and curious to know about this subject, but they seem a bit unaware?
I think there's looking at the globe, I think there's, my point of view, incredibly low awareness of what's happening here. I mean, if I go to U.S., for example, you have to explain and try to show them some of these striking photos, for example, of glaciers in Nepal. It takes a lot to get their attention to get that wake-up call.
Are they ignoring or just unaware about this fact?
Well, I think I think people have a lot of problems on their mind, and probably problems of Nepal might be interesting, but not the ones they face day to day. So, but it is good to put these issues in front, and people do get. I mean, humans are concerned about other people on the world. So, but it takes some effort. It really almost have to grab and shake sometimes to do that.
Lastly, any message?
Well, I think we all, as for Nepal, we all have a really tough road ahead. I know probably in Nepal too, there's a lot of issues on everybody's minds, and then there's climate change, right? So, but I think if we can, if we address climate change issues, it's also a way to address many other issues as well. Let's get together and work on some of these problems. Let's, in a united way, let's address our science. Let's develop solutions. These solutions can help us today and tomorrow, and they'll help us in the long run adapt to climate change. So I think, and finally, Nepal really can take a leadership role in showing different ways to address these issues of climate change. And in a way, we're on the forefront here because we can feel the impacts right now. So if we can get some good solutions. Let's take those out and show other people what they're like. That's entirely possible.
Thank you so much for your valuable time on this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
पृथ्वीको तापक्रममा आएको वृद्धिसँगै अत्याधिक मात्रामा हिउँ पग्लिन थालेपछि हिम नदीहरूको बहावमा पनि वृद्धि हुन थालेको छ। केही वर्ष पहिलेसम्म चाँदी झैं टल्कने हिमाली डाँडाहरू यति बेला नाङ्गा डाँडामा परिवर्तन भएको छ। ठूला र विकसित राष्ट्रहरूले गरेको कार्बन उत्सर्जनको पीडा नेपाल लगायत अन्य मुलुकहरूले पनि भोगिरहेको छ। नेपालका हिमालहरूको स्रोतको आधार भएर बग्ने नदीहरूमा भारतीय उपमहाद्वीपकै अरबौं प्राणीको दैनिकी गुज्रिरहेको छ। त्यसैले पनि नेपालको हिमाल र हिमतालहरू जोखिममा पर्नु भनेको नेपालको मात्र नभएर यो साझा समस्या नै बनेको छ र यसको दीर्घकालीन समाधान खोज्नु जरुरी छ। क्यामेरा पर्सन गंगा भण्डारी, यसैगरी सम्पादक रूपेश थपलिया र इसिमोड संस्थालाई धेरै धन्यवाद। इश्यू अफ द डे को यो श्रृंखला यति नै बिदा दिनुहोस्। नमस्ते।